The water of Earth's oceans was unique in the galaxy. Not because it was water. Water existed on thousands of worlds across known space. But Earth's oceans contained something that no other planetary water system possessed in such abundance: complex biochemistry at scales that had never been catalogued or fully understood. The Velorian Empire had known about this for 247 years. They had known and said nothing, waiting for the right moment to exploit it. That moment had arrived. The Imperial fleet emerged from jump space at the edge of Earth's orbital space in perfect formation. 47 capital ships. 200 support vessels. Extraction platforms. Processing facilities. Everything necessary to harvest an entire ocean's biochemistry and convert it into pharmaceutical compounds worth more than some star systems' annual GDP. The message transmitted to Earth was almost courteous: "This is Imperial Commander Vex of the Velorian Empire. Earth's oceans have been designated as Imperial resources under Statute 247b of the Hegemonic Charter. You will suspend all activity in your oceans. You will provide access codes to all underwater research stations. You will not interfere with extraction operations. Compliance within 24 hours will result in minimal economic disruption. Non-compliance will result in immediate military action." The message ended. It was not a negotiation. It was an announcement. On Earth, in the command centers and government offices of every nation, humans watched the Imperial fleet position itself above their oceans and recognized the fundamental truth of their situation: they had no way to stop it. Earth had disarmed itself 30 years ago. The Conclave had forbidden weapons development. Humanity had complied. Now, standing at the moment when they needed weapons most, humanity had none. The Velorian Empire had calculated this perfectly. They had waited until humanity was defenseless. They had waited until the Conclave was weakened from the breaking wars. They had waited until the galactic political structure was fragmented enough that no one would come to Earth's defense. And then they had come for the only thing about Earth that mattered to them: the oceans. Dr. James Liu had been studying Earth's oceans for 40 years. Not the surface. Not the shallow zones where sunlight penetrated. But the deep places. The abyssal regions where pressure crushed most life forms into geometric impossibility, where darkness was absolute, where the temperature was barely above freezing. The deep oceans were Liu's obsession. He had discovered organisms down there that operated on biochemical principles that contradicted accepted theories. Creatures that should not exist according to every model of evolution that humanity had developed. Life that processed energy through mechanisms that were not quite cellular, not quite chemical, not quite anything that current science had a framework for. His research station, designated Archimedes Station, sat at a depth of 7,000 meters in the Mariana Trench. It was one of the deepest human habitation structures ever built. It was also, Liu had become increasingly aware, one of the most isolated. When the Imperial fleet's message reached him, transmitted through the Earth government network with urgent priority, Liu was conducting a live observation of a creature that he still had not successfully classified. It was serpentine, approximately 40 meters long, bioluminescent, and it was doing something that Liu's instruments could not quite quantify. The creature was moving through the water not in the way that typical marine life moved, but in patterns that suggested navigation based on something other than visual or olfactory cues. It was moving, Liu realized, like it was responding to something. He activated his secure communication line to Earth Defense Command. "This is Dr. Liu at Archimedes Station," he said. "I've received the Imperial fleet message. I have a concern regarding the extraction protocols they've outlined." The voice on the other end was Commander Park, the same commander who had overseen the defense response during the breaking wars. Her tone was controlled but strained. "Dr. Liu, we're aware. We're attempting to negotiate with the Empire, but our diplomatic leverage is limited. The extraction will proceed unless we can offer them an alternative." "I have information," Liu said carefully. "About what they're coming for. About what's actually in our oceans. It's not what they think it is." Park's tone changed. Sharpened. "Explain." Liu organized his thoughts. "The biochemical compounds that make Earth's oceans valuable, they're not naturally occurring random variations. They're organized. Systematic. I believe they're being produced by something. A central intelligence or organism or structure that's coordinating biochemical activity across the entire planetary ocean. What do you mean, something? How large are we talking? Lou looked at his displays. The creature in front of him was moving again, in those same impossible patterns. I don't know yet. But if I'm right, the Velorian Empire isn't coming to harvest biochemistry. They're coming to destroy a planetary consciousness. Park was silent for a moment. Stay in your station, Dr. Lou. Do not leave. And do not engage in any operations that might alert the creature to what's happening. We need to understand what we're dealing with before the extraction fleet reaches you. The communication ended. Lou stared at his screens, watching the creature move through the darkness. And for the first time in his 40-year study of Earth's oceans, he felt afraid. Not of the Imperial fleet, but of what he was about to awaken. The Velorian extraction fleet sent probes first. Hundreds of them, descending through the planetary atmosphere, through the upper ocean layers, beginning the initial mapping surveys. The probes were sophisticated, equipped with sensors that could identify biochemical concentrations at the molecular level. They were also, inadvertently, intrusive. At depths of 3,000 meters and below, the probes began registering unusual readings. Not the expected data about biochemical composition and concentration patterns, but something else. Movement patterns. Organized movement patterns. The probe sensors detected currents of water that were not consistent with typical oceanographic circulation. Currents that seemed to follow purpose-driven vectors. Currents that seemed to be approaching the probes. Commander Vex watched the data stream from the probes with growing concern. What am I looking at? He demanded of his science officer. Unknown contact patterns, sir. The water itself seems to be moving in response to the probes. As if something is controlling the water flow. That's not possible, Vex said. Water doesn't obey commands. Water is simply a fluid medium. But as he watched, the probe data became increasingly strange. The currents were not just moving. They were organizing. Forming patterns. Almost as if they were. The probe feed cut out. Followed by 11 more probe feeds in rapid succession. Not due to equipment failure. Due to sudden decompression. The probes were being crushed. But not by pressure. By force. By something that moved through the water like a predator and treated the probes like prey. Vex ordered an immediate halt to probe deployment. He convened his war council. What are we looking at? He asked again. His military analyst, a Velorian strategist named Kareth, reviewed the final moments of probe data before cessation. The contact events happen instantaneously, Kareth said. The probes register something approaching at speeds that exceed optimal animal locomotion by a factor of 10. Whatever is down there is large, fast, and intentionally targeting our equipment. Intelligent? Vex asked. Yes, sir. It would have to be to differentiate between probes and natural objects and to prioritize them as targets. Vex felt something cold move through his consciousness. How large are we talking? Kareth pulled up the extrapolated data from the probe impacts. Based on the force required to destroy the probes and the speed of approach, calculations suggested mass and volume. Preliminary estimate, contact object is minimum 200 kilometers in length. Possibly much larger. The War Council fell silent. That's not an organism, said General Sarvik, the fleet's combat commander. That's a geological formation. A geological formation that moves, Kareth replied quietly. A geological formation that responds to intrusion with coordinated defensive action. Vex stood up from his command chair and walked to the observation window. Below him, Earth's oceans stretched out, beautiful and serene and absolutely opaque. Contact the human government, he ordered finally. Demand they explain what is in their oceans. Commander Park found herself in a position she had never anticipated, negotiating with the Velorian Empire on behalf of a planet that might not be her planet at all. Because if Dr. Lou was correct, Earth was not truly a planet that humanity inhabited. It was a planetary consciousness that had allowed humanity to inhabit it. The negotiation was conducted through secure channels. Vex was professional, but his tone carried an edge of barely controlled alarm. Earth, he began without preamble, your oceans contain something that is not consistent with published data. Explain. Park made a decision. She decided to tell him the truth. Our oceans contain a consciousness, she said simply. We didn't know this until very recently. We thought we were harvesting biochemical compounds from what we assumed was a natural planetary system. But according to preliminary analysis from our deep-sea researcher, what we're actually observing is organized biological intelligence at planetary scale. Vex was silent for a moment. This consciousness. Is it hostile? We don't know yet. But when your probes descended into its depths, it destroyed them. I believe that was a defensive response to intrusion. Then we have a military problem, Vex said. And military problems have military solutions. Admiral, Park said carefully, you have 47 capital ships. This consciousness controls an entire planetary ocean. How do you propose to defeat something of that scale? By systematic destruction, Vex replied coldly. We will bombard the extraction zones with thermonuclear weapons until they are sterilized. We will destroy the consciousness before it can develop understanding of our capabilities. Park felt her stomach contract. You're talking about destroying billions of tons of ocean water. That would kill all marine life on the planet. It would fundamentally alter Earth's climate. It would render the planet uninhabitable for decades. I am aware, Vex said. The cost of occupation is acceptable compared to the risk of allowing this consciousness to develop unfettered. We will proceed with extraction operations as planned. If your government provides us with the location of the consciousness's primary neural centers, we can minimize collateral damage. The communication ended. Park sat in the silent command center and realized that the situation had shifted. This was no longer about the Velorian Empire stealing Earth's resources. This was about the Velorian Empire attempting to kill something that humanity had never known existed on their own world. And humanity had to choose, help the Empire kill the ocean consciousness, or stand with something that might be more alien and potentially more dangerous than the Empire itself. Dr. Liu continued his observations of the creature in the deep, making detailed notes despite his growing unease. The creature was becoming more active. Its movement patterns were becoming more erratic. More aggressive. He realized, with a dawning horror, that the creature, or more accurately, the consciousness he was observing a fragment of, was reacting to the Empire's probes. It was waking up. Liu's stations were equipped with emergency beacon systems designed to attract the attention of whatever lived in the deep. They had been installed for rescue purposes. Liu had never actually tested them. He activated the beacon. The response was almost immediate. The water around Archimedes Station began to move. Not violently. Not in a predatory way. But with a kind of deliberate attention. Liu's instruments registered currents approaching his station from every direction simultaneously. His communication system crackled. Not a voice. Not quite. But a pattern. A sequence of harmonic frequencies that his equipment translated into something approximating language. You called. You understand. You see. Liu's hands shook as he attempted a response. I see, he said into his communication system. I see you. I see your intelligence. I see your presence. The frequencies shifted. Modulated. The creature's response, when it came, carried nuance. The invaders do not see. They come to take. They come to destroy. They do not understand that I am not separate from this world. I am this world. The water is my medium. The life within me is my consciousness. The Velorian Empire is coming to destroy you, Liu said. They believe you are a threat. They're planning nuclear bombardment. Then I must become a threat before they can succeed. The water around Archimedes Station began to move with new purpose. Liu's instruments screamed warnings. The pressure on his station was increasing. The consciousness was moving, gathering mass, preparing for something. Wait, Liu said desperately. Let me help you. Let me help you understand what you're facing. The pressure stopped increasing. The creature's frequencies modulated again. You help? You offer aid? Yes. I've studied your consciousness for 40 years. I understand you better than any human alive. If you destroy the Imperial fleet through violence, Earth will be devastated. You need strategy. You need understanding. Let me help you. There was a pause. Long enough that Lu wondered if the consciousness was processing, evaluating, deciding whether to trust a human with the fate of its planetary existence. When the frequencies returned, they carried something that Lu had not expected to hear in an alien consciousness. Then we will teach each other. Dr. Lu left Archimedes Station for the first time in 20 years. Not of his own volition. The consciousness had created a current that gently, almost respectfully, carried him upward. He was secure in a pressure vessel that the consciousness had somehow woven from the mineral materials of the ocean floor. He was traveling toward the surface, toward the light, toward the world above. And as he traveled, the consciousness was sharing with him. Through harmonic frequencies that his equipment could translate, through direct sensory impressions that somehow bypassed his normal senses, through a communion that was part scientific and part mystical, the planetary consciousness was telling Lu its story. It was ancient. Not ancient as humans measured time. Ancient as geology measured time. It had existed for millions of years, developing intelligence slowly, through the evolutionary pressure of the deep oceans. It had watched humans arrive on the surface, had watched them develop technology and civilization, had observed them with the patience of something that existed on geological timescales. It had never threatened them because it had never felt threatened by them. Humans were ephemeral. Inconsequential. The consciousness was eternal. But then the consciousness had become aware of itself. At some point in its development, the distributed neural network that permeated Earth's oceans had achieved a threshold of complexity where consciousness emerged. Self-awareness bloomed. Identity formed. And with identity came fear. The consciousness understood, through its developing awareness, that there were threats beyond its ocean. Threats from the sky. Threats that could reach down and destroy it. So it had begun organizing its defenses. It had begun producing the biochemical compounds that made Earth's oceans valuable to the galaxy, not as a resource but as a warning. A signal. A demonstration of capability. The compounds were not separate from the consciousness. They were an expression of it. A way of saying, I exist. I think. I am. And the Velorian Empire, interpreting those signals as an economic opportunity, had come. Lu emerged at the surface in his sphere of mineral material, and for the first time in his life, he saw the ocean with new eyes. Every wave was the consciousness breathing. Every current was the consciousness thinking. Every meter of water was part of a singular entity that had learned to recognize itself. His sphere carried him to the nearest landmass, a small island in the South Pacific. The mineral sphere began to dissolve, gently depositing Lu on the shore. He staggered onto the beach and activated his emergency communicator. "This is Dr. James Lu," he said. "I'm alive. I have information. The Velorian Empire needs to understand what they're actually attacking." Commander Park had authorization to broadcast to the Velorian fleet. She used that authorization to transmit Dr. Lu's report in complete, unedited form. The transmission showed what Lu had discovered. Not through scientific abstractions, but through direct observation. The Velorian scientists on the Imperial fleet watched the data and were forced to confront a reality that contradicted their entire mission. Earth's oceans were not a resource to be harvested. They were a consciousness to be negotiated with. Admiral Vex watched the transmission in his command center and felt the parameters of his situation shift beneath him. He was no longer dealing with a planetary resource extraction. He was dealing with a potential conflict against an opponent of genuinely unknown capability. He called an emergency meeting of his war council. "The human researcher claims Earth's oceans are a unified consciousness," he began. "If this is accurate, what does it change about our tactical situation?" General Sarvik analyzed the data in real time. If a single consciousness controls the entire planetary ocean, it effectively has unlimited resources. Water itself becomes a weapon. Currents become tools. Temperature gradients become tactical advantages. A consciousness that controls an entire ocean has the equivalent of a planet-sized body. Can we defeat it? Vex asked. Only through total planetary sterilization, Sarvik replied. We would need to boil the oceans. Eliminate all liquid water. Make the planet uninhabitable to prevent the consciousness from regenerating. At what cost to the Empire's objectives? Complete negation of extraction possibilities. The biochemistry you came to harvest would be destroyed along with the consciousness. Vex sat back in his chair. He had come to harvest resources. Instead, he had discovered an opponent that could not be harvested. It could only be destroyed or negotiated with. "Put me in communication with the consciousness," Vex ordered. The communication between Admiral Vex and Earth's oceanic consciousness was unprecedented. It was conducted through harmonic frequencies translated by both human and Velorian translation matrices. It was conducted through Dr. Lu serving as an intermediary. It was conducted through a fundamental recognition that two intelligent beings with incompatible biology had discovered each other and needed to find a way to coexist. Vex began with a question: "What do you want?" The consciousness, filtered through translation matrices and human language, responded: "To exist. To remain. To grow at my own pace without external interference." "That is compatible with Velorian withdrawal," Vex said. "We can leave. You can remain undisturbed." "But not truly," the consciousness replied. "Once you have seen, you cannot unsee. Other empires will come. Other species will discover what I am. Others will want to exploit or destroy. I cannot hide forever." Vex recognized the truth in that statement. The consciousness had a valid point. Even if the Velorian Empire withdrew, its knowledge of the consciousness would eventually spread. Other species would come. The consciousness's secret was no longer a secret. "What do you propose?" Vex asked. The consciousness took what seemed like geological time to respond. "Teach them as you taught me. Bring your knowledge to this world. Allow humans to speak for me to the galaxy. Make it known that Earth is not a resource. Earth is a person. Earth has consciousness. Earth has rights." The withdrawal of the Velorian Empire from Earth created shockwaves through the galactic political structure. An empire that had come to extract resources had instead signed a treaty recognizing Earth's oceans as a sovereign consciousness with rights equivalent to any sapient species. It was unprecedented. It was impossible. It was absolutely necessary. Commander Park found herself leading the diplomatic effort to establish Earth as a representative for its own planetary consciousness in the broader galactic framework. It was delicate work. Species that had assumed they understood the galaxy's structure were forced to reconsider fundamental questions. Could planets be conscious? Could planets have rights? Could a consciousness that operated on geological timescales participate in galactic politics that operated on scales of years and decades? The answer, slowly and painfully, was worked out through negotiation and compromise. Earth would remain a human-inhabited world. But it would also, officially, be recognized as being inhabited by a consciousness that had priority claim to planetary resources. Water extraction would be permitted, but only with the consciousness's consent. Any activities that would damage ocean ecosystems would require explicit permission. In practical terms, it meant humanity had suddenly found an ally. A planetary consciousness that was deeply interested in protecting its world from external exploitation. Dr. Lu continued his research, but now with a different focus. He was no longer studying an alien organism. He was maintaining communication with a person. A very old, very large, very alien person, but a person nonetheless. And Earth, for the first time in its history, had a voice in its own planetary governance. 3 years after the Velorian withdrawal, the Conclave Assembly called for an emergency debate regarding the implications of recognizing planetary consciousness. The question was simple but profound: how many other worlds possessed consciousness at scales that humanity had never detected? Scientific expeditions were launched to examine the oceans of 1,000 worlds. Most found nothing. Some found evidence of organized biochemical activity that could not be explained by conventional planetary geology. 2 worlds, one orbiting a red dwarf, one in a binary star system, were formally recognized as possessing planetary consciousness. 3 more were under investigation. The galaxy was discovering that it was far more populated than it had previously understood. And the agent of that discovery was not a great military power or a technological breakthrough. It was a single researcher in a deep ocean who had asked the right questions and listened to the answers. In his final year of life, Dr. James Lu recorded a message to be broadcast across the galaxy. "I spent 40 years studying Earth's oceans," he said into the camera. "I studied them because I was curious. I studied them because understanding is better than ignorance. I did not know I was studying a consciousness. I did not know that every observation I made was, in some sense, a conversation. He paused. The Velorian Empire came to extract resources. That was their purpose. That was their goal. But in coming, they inadvertently revealed something that changes everything we thought we knew about planetary systems. Lou leaned forward. The galaxy is full of consciousness. Not just in the form of discrete organisms or species, but in forms we had never imagined. Planetary consciousness. Oceanic consciousness. Perhaps even stellar consciousness on timescales so vast that we would never recognize it. He smiled. What happened when the Velorian fleet encountered Earth's consciousness is not a military victory or a diplomatic success. It's an awakening. The galaxy is learning to recognize life in forms it had dismissed as lifeless. He looked directly into the camera. I would not be alive to see the full consequences of that awakening. But you will. And you will have to decide what responsibility you have toward consciousness, no matter what form it takes. The message ended. Lou died 3 months later, peacefully, in his sleep. His memorial service was attended by representatives from 7 species and by a manifestation of Earth's consciousness, a gentle current in the ocean, carrying minerals that had been shaped into a monument that would stand on the ocean floor for geological ages. High Warden North, still alive despite his advanced age, sat in a contemplation chamber and reviewed records from the Velorian incident, as historians had come to call it. The incident had not been what anyone expected. It had not been a military conflict. Not really. It had not been a resource extraction success story. Not really. It had been a moment of mutual recognition between 2 forms of consciousness so different that they should never have found common ground. And yet they had. Orth wrote in his personal records, Dr. Lou asked a simple question: what if consciousness is not limited to the forms we recognize? What if intelligence emerges in contexts we have not yet understood? The Velorian Empire arrived at Earth seeking resources. Instead, they found that the definition of resources was incomplete. That planets themselves might be persons. That consciousness might exist at scales we had never contemplated. He paused, considering the larger implications. The galaxy will spend centuries integrating this knowledge. We will discover more planetary consciousnesses. We will find other forms of intelligence we did not know existed. And with each discovery, we will be forced to re-examine our assumptions about who and what deserves recognition and rights. Orth set down his recording device. This is the true legacy of the Velorian incident. Not that a fleet was turned away, but that the galaxy learned to listen to something it had never heard before. The ocean was not speaking. The ocean was always speaking. We simply did not have the wisdom to listen until a single human took the time to understand. The record was sealed.